Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, or whatever time period it is, and wherever you are in the world, and welcome to Chapter 2, or Episode 2 of the Law by Night YouTube channel Let's Play of Werewolf the Apocalypse, Heart of the Forest. And if you haven't watched the first episode, I really recommend you go and watch that so you have a better understanding of what we're dealing with here. And without further ado, are we sitting comfortably? Good. Then I'll begin with Chapter 2, Logging. The next morning was full of sunshine and birdsong. I could smell the heart of the afternoon building, those long, honey-like hours in late June when the earth isn't tired of its own warmth yet. But it was crisp and pleasant now. I got up. I sat on my bed for a moment, letting my feet dangle from it. I felt angry. The weight of the previous day had coiled up from somewhere in my chest, and it felt like a tiny merry-go-round gaining speed. And then there was the dream. Then I remembered the dream, the clearing, the animals and the night sky, waiting for me. I took a shower and ate something without really paying attention and went out. Anya joined you. Us, should I say. We were halfway through the forest and Bartek caught up with us. You're right, Anya. The protest is important. Protests? Activists? Answers? I was so focused on my anger and the turmoil in my head that I really didn't care where I was going. When I snapped out of it, the sun was shining, the village was far behind me, and I wasn't sure how I'd gotten there. Anya looked around. So, what's the plan? I needed to find someone. There was someone I had to find and press for answers. Daniel. I want to talk to Daniel. He seemed to know more than he told me. I have a feeling that he's here trying to save the Pushka. I looked around. On my right was the ancient forest. On my left was the freshly torn clearing. Ahead of me, ruining the view, were huge logging machines and a group of people arguing in their shadow. I thought the machines were sucking the life out of the air, like they were a wound, not just pieces of equipment. I looked at the clearing. The trees they'd cut down lay in the middle, thrown together, lifeless, limp, just like in the dream. Surrounding them were the harvesters that killed them, and people who squabbled over the corpses. Their protesters, the reporters, the police, and of course, the loggers. The harvesters loomed over the clearing, reeking. I saw a familiar face among the protesters. I noticed Daniel. He stood near a group of arguing protesters, but as I cast my eyes on him, he went to one of the harvesters, turned his back on the other people there, and started pissing on the machine. The protesters were clearly conflicted. I had business to do. there, so I went towards them. One of the police officers, young and nervous, said something I didn't fully understand. I let Bartek handle it. Bartek leaned over to him and whispered something. The officer instantly lost interest. "Oh," he said, "you're one of them." And then they let us go. Then I noticed that someone joined us. And then I noticed that someone used the commotion to sneaked with us past the police. A girl with disheveled, bleached-out hair. "Don't worry," she patted the officer on the arm. It was an awful pickup line anyway. He recoiled. You shouldn't touch me, ma'am." I rolled my eyes and wanted to say something, but I was interrupted. "Pat!" Cornell called her from the gathering. "Could you come over here? I need you to show Olga the chart." She sighed, reaching to her backpack and taking out a tablet. "And they're at it again," she murmured under her breath and winked at me. "Coming!" We went towards the activists. As I walked towards Daniel, I heard more and more of the argument. "Olga, you can't," Cornell was saying. Pat stood next to him with her tablet. She looked a bit amused. "Do not fucking tell me what I can or can't do, Cornell," the woman with dreadlocks interrupted. "I can because they are destroying our mother. I can fight with all the means at my disposal, even if that means burning these harvesters to the ground." Cornell raised his eyebrows. Burn the harvesters, Cornell asked calmly. In this drought? Olga, are you out of your mind? You know what I mean. We fight them in any way we can because there's a fucking war, she spat. He sighed. You've never seen a real war and it shows. Nobody's shooting at us, believe me. We want it to stay that way. We need a peaceful protest. I approached Daniel. Hey, can we talk? I asked, approaching Daniel. He smiled, zipping his pants. Oh, hi Maia. I think our leaders are arguing now and it has to be settled. It's good you came, actually. We need to tell Cornell that he's wrong. Oh, so I was to take a stand. I looked at them. I looked at them both, Olga with fury and passion, Cornell with his cool professional demeanour, and shared without reservations when I felt what I felt about the situation. It wasn't a war. Yet. It's not a war. Not yet. My voice rang clear into the silence. But they won't stop unless we make them. I only inflamed the situation. The argument attracted more and more people. Someone old shook their head and moved forward. They had deep wrinkles, a narrow mouth, and the unisex grace of a tired, heroin-preserved rock man. I totally dug their style. They had shoulder-length, dishevelled hair, a clean shave, and eyes highlighted with eyeliner. Bright blue nails, heavy army boots, a red skirt, and a tank top complemented the look. And pins. Lots of pins. All kinds of LGBTQA+ flags, anarchist pacifist symbols, and I think some German band stripes? I observed them curiously. Olga, darling, you know I love you, but Cornell really knows what he's doing. Please trust me on that one. They talked to Olga, but kept glancing at me as if to check how I reacted. Fuck off, Kim. You don't even trust me enough to come here on your own when I asked you to. There was a woman at Olga's side. Next to Olga, there stood a woman, and she was the most beautiful person I'd ever seen. I couldn't tear my eyes off her. She had a perfect hourglass figure, long braids, and the most stunning cheekbones. Her eyes slightly slanted, were a wide shade of blue, deep, almost purple. She had a peculiar accent. Kim, you want to teach me about violence? She looked them straight in the eye. About fighting oppression? Just because your boss went to one mission in Afghanistan? Her Polish was peculiar, kind of mellow. Cornell winced. Lisa, leave Kim alone. He didn't know what to say, and it seemed that the whole discussion would be derailed. Maybe it was for the best. I let them solve it their way, and then Olga punched Cornell firmly in the face, turned around and walked away. He turned round, holding his jaw and wincing, and then he started to laugh softly. The conversation was over, at least for the time being. Cornell, together with his cronies, walked towards the reporters while Olga went back to the group of people standing in the shadow of an old oak tree. I looked to the forest. I looked at the pushka. The clearing full of felled trees was like a gaping, bleeding wound in the chest of a friend. I had to do something. I looked at my friends. We have to stop this logging. Yes, just like Olga said, Anya nodded, excited. What they are doing is unforgivable and we have to fight. It's a very complicated situation, Bartek looked thoughtfully. I like what that guy Cornell said, that we should proceed peacefully, not to discourage the public and potential supporters. I looked at one group, I looked at the other. The harvesters were dripping with black oil and the forest stood tall, serene, and full of a golden light. It looked like it could protest itself, and then I looked at the felled trees. Dead, limp, helpless. Cornell, diplomacy. Cornell owed me some explanations. Hey, wait for me! I shouted and ran after him. Hello, Maia, he said. I've seen you haven't come alone. He reached out with his hand. I shook it. His handshake was firm and strong. His eyes were an uncanny shade of grey. Damn, he looked tough. Damn, you look like a tough guy, I blurted out, impressed. He was in that bad boy hipster military way. I know, he said without skipping a beat. Cornell looked me in the eyes. I know why you came to Bylovisia. The forest is reaching out to you because for a long time your ancestors were its servants, and now you're the only one left to pay what they owed. He seemed to believe it. I looked at him, skeptical, but he seemed to believe it. The important question is, he looked at me intensely, do you want to help? I had no time to answer. But before I could answer, I heard a commotion turned round. The reporters were coming our way, but their cameras were switched off and pointed at the ground. They should have been filming. You should be filming, I snapped at them. The protest was important, and even I knew that, and they just didn't care. Easy there, Cornell put his hand on my shoulder. The reporter shook his head and grimaced. Sorry, everyone, we can't do anything. We're not allowed to cover what's going on here. Suddenly, I understood. Then it hit me. The police weren't here to protect the protesters or the press. Yeah, it must be hard to do your job when the police is watching your every step, I said, and they nodded. There was a moment of tense silence. And then it all came together. Suddenly, I understood the dream. That was the moment I was destined to intervene. We could still use the reporters. I looked at the protesters. They didn't have any real plan. They were a ragtag bunch thrown together by circumstance without a real plan or a clear purpose. I looked round, put my hand in my pocket and wandered towards the journalists. The cops were scared. We have the upper hand. We know what we stand for. They don't, I continued. They think they're the masters here, but they're just following orders. They're just weak, vulnerable humans. They think their badges and weapons will protect them. Unspectacular as it was, I managed to connect. I acted on it. Does it always look like this? I asked. I mean, is it an everyday situation that you can't report? No, answered one of them. He was tall, in his 30s. There was a few glances towards him, almost a flash of warning. But it was too late. But why were they in the Bylovisia at all? Again, apologies for any botched Polish words. Wait, so why are you here at all? I asked, and then it hit me. You were sent here to find some dirt on the activists, to get something that would compromise the protests. They looked at one another, suddenly unsure of what to say. Then I heard shouts as Olga and her protesters clashed with the police, and the cameramen grabbed their gear and ran towards the action. Remember, we want the aggressive ones, shouted one of the reporters. I could see the logo of the national TV station on his camera. Soon, we were alone. Fuck! Cornell swore and threw his thermal cap at the ground. It bounced, spilling hot coffee everywhere. Someone grabbed me by my shoulder. I turned round and saw Kim. This is where you exit the scene. They turned me around and gently but firmly pushed me away. We'll be in touch, they whispered. When I was on the road to the village and nobody could see me, I stopped and screamed. A startled flock of birds took off the trees nearby and filled the air with feathers and movement. In the whole commotion, I lost Anya and Bartek from my sight. I was alone. Or so I thought. Hey, are you alright? A voice behind me said, and I jumped. A woman was walking toward me. It was all too much. It was too much, I whispered. All of that. We walked slowly towards the village. We talked. I learned that she was an independent German reporter who'd come here about a month ago. Her name was Erica. So why are you protesting the logging, she asked after a few minutes of small talk. We had to save the pushka. I think the pushka is unique, and when I saw how many trees they cut in just one afternoon, it just broke my heart. I said, still shaken by the sheer number of fallen trees. I have to do whatever I can to save the forest. I looked at her. And why are you asking? She looked at me with renewed interest. Do you know why they are cutting down the trees? She asked back. Because you do know that logging is done by government company, the state forests. The fuckers. The fuckers, I growled. Politicians are tainted. I hated politicians. I say we take off and nuke them from the orbit, I shook my head. Pretty radical, she snorted with laughter. But that destroy the forest? Erica reached for her notebook. It all started with spruce bark beetles. Erica looked into her notes and started explaining the whole situation. That year, the beetles' infestation was of catastrophic proportions, and the foresters decided that was the only way to stop it and save the rest of the forest was cut down as many infested trees as fast as possible. Was cutting down the trees necessary? Is cutting down the trees the only way to stop the infestation? I asked, confused. The foresters state that this is the only way, she said. Some biologists argue that they are cutting the wrong trees and doing it too late to change anything. Couldn't they just remove the dead trees? Maybe if they removed the dead trees, the infestation wouldn't spread. I tried to find a solution. That might do it, but dead trees are what make the forest unique, Erica smiled. There are 20 times more species living on a dead spruce than There are 20 times more species living on a dead spruce tree than on an alive one. But was the logging legal? But is the logging legal? I wanted to know. Opinions differ, but such massive logging in a UNESCO-listed area might be illegal, Erica answered. Did they have to intervene at all? Couldn't they just leave the pushka alone and let nature take its course, I asked. That's one of the options, Erica admitted, but there's a drought, and no one is sure if the forest would survive it on its own. A drought, and no one is sure if the forest would survive on its own. It was infuriating. Why couldn't you just answer my question? But I tried to understand her point of view. I see that you're trying to show me the whole picture, and I appreciate it, I sighed. I just hoped there would be an easy answer. Just doing my job, Erica shrugged. I describe all the aspects of the situation to you, but it's up to you to decide what you want to do. It was a tough decision. I shook my head. Why did the situation always have to be so complex? At least I was sure that they were cutting down the trees and the pushka needed my help. It was a matter of principle. If I asked you which side had bigger guns, what would you say? I looked at Erica. The government, she answered, and that's why I stand with the protesters. She looked skeptical. You're not the only one feeling helpless, she sighed, but anger makes you see things in black and white, and the truth is always more nuanced than that. So what was right and what was wrong? So what should I do when I feel that something is wrong? I asked, exasperated. Do you believe that people can be evil? She asked back. Some people were bad. Some are, for sure, I shrugged. But isn't that too easy an explanation? I said nothing. What's the matter? She asked. I admitted my helplessness. Felt so helpless when I saw all of that. I took a deep breath, and then I remember what Cornell had said. All that mystical stuff. And then they said I had some family debts to pay. I shook my head. It's a lot to take in, and there was that foul smell back there. She looked at me with a weird expression. What smell? She asked. The smell was not the point. Of all the things I told you, you asked about the smell, I huffed. I'm trying to understand what's going on here. I think I know what's going on, she answered slowly, but I don't think that I should be the one explaining it to you. I looked at her and raised my eyebrow questioningly. She looked hurt. I thought she'd been hurt by my outburst. You'll learn in your own time if you stay here long enough, she said, clearly wanting to drop the topic. What does she mean? What do you mean? I asked, getting irritated. I just told you. You'll learn in time, or not at all, which would frankly be better. Anyway, gotta run. As I watched her leave, I thought that whatever was my family legacy had surely manifested itself that day. I guess I'd made some progress. I jumped right into the middle of a very tense situation, at the very least upset the status quo. I just hoped I hadn't made things worse. I walked on in silence. When I opened the door, I found Anya and Bartek sitting on Anya's bed. They were a little flustered and were nonchalantly trying to look like I hadn't interrupted anything. "We lost sight of you," Bartek said apologetically. "I'm glad you made it back in one piece." "So, how was your day?" Anya asked. I shrugged. "Just another day in Bilovizia." We sat for a while in silence. "You know, there's more to see than Bilovizia," Bartek said to me. "You should visit these 4 Polish places that I'm not going to bother pronouncing." There's this one. And this one. This one. And this one. See? The open-air museum and the bison. The logging is not all that happens here. I couldn't see everything. "It would be great if I could see everything, but I can't," I shrugged. "I want to focus on the logging even if I'm missing something else." "And how's the search for your roots going?" I asked Bartek. Sorry, asked Bartek, not I asked Bartek, clearly wanting to change the topic. I shared what I'd learned. "It seems that my ancestors lived around the forest for a long time," I said, "and there was some kind of debt to be paid." "Wow." Anya looked impressed. "Honestly, I'm not sure what to think, but if you need something, just let me know." I was tired. I just sat there, looking through the window. They'd been full on and I was exhausted. I didn't notice when I fell asleep. It's quiet now, yet I know deep down inside that something isn't right. I run. I'm running through the forest, to the logging site. It's getting dark. The light seeps away as though there are millions of tiny punch holes in the sky, through which it can escape, and then the darkness starts to pour in. I know what I will see. And I see bodies strewn across the ground, bloodied, maimed, with their limbs torn from destroyed torsos. I can see some of them are still alive, still struggling for air, still trying to live. They are all the trees, fallen trees, still alive, still struggling for air. And there's the stench. I can smell them. The stench is dark, rancid, putrid. There are monsters at the edges of the forest. They have long skeletal arms. They are wrapped in glistening black intestines, and each arm has a wide gaping mandible full of wiring blades. They snap at me blindly. I feel rage pumping through me like molten lava, bubbling from the ground through my feet, up my legs, through my chest to my head, and so I suddenly explode. I charge! With a howl of joy and anticipation, I run towards the shapes and start to destroy. I bite off heads and tear off arms. I am a force of nature, unstoppable. Then I wake up. I gasped. I bolted upright. I was alone. The sun was setting, and in the deep red light, the room looked like it was bathed in blood. My pillow was on the ground, gutted, and the duvet was in shreds. The air was of tiny feathers dancing in the draught from my window. What the fuck was going on? And there we go, we have reached the end of Chapter 2, and the plot thickens, family. I hope you enjoyed that somewhat shorter episode to the previous one, and, well, until next time, farewell.